Mikhail Naimy Home Museum in Taleb enfolds all the details of Naimy's house at Zalka, where he spent the last 20 years of his life with his niece May Najib Naimy, whom he called his guardian angel, and her daughter Suha, and where Naimy took his last breath on February 28, 1988. The three formed the Mimasuna family, Mikhail, May, Suha, Naimy, and have preserved all the details of those last 20 years of Naimy's life and many of those before that span of time. Therefore, the Mikhail Naimy Home Museum in Taleb focuses on Naimy's last 20 years of his Zalka home in particular and highlights Naimy's other life phases in general. Each room of the Mikhail Naimy Home Museum in Taleb exhibits the daily habits of Naimy and his Mimasuna family, and each room is documented with photos, published and unpublished manuscripts, personal belongings, mementos and more that testify to the life that Naimy lived in his Zalka home, from where 6 books were issued to the world. The Mikhail Naimy Home Museum in Taleb exhibits some as well of what Naimy safe-kept, in his Zalka home, that belongs to the previous phases of his life. Mikhail Joseph Naimy, October 17, 1889 to February 28, 1988, was a Lebanese poet, novelist, and philosopher, famous for his spiritual writings, notably the Book of Mirdad. He is widely recognized as one of the most important figures in modern Arabic literature and one of the most important spiritual writers of the 20th century. In 1920, Naimy reformed the New York Pen League, along with its original founders Nacy Barida and Abd al-Masih Haddad, and other Majari literary figures such as Khalil Gibran. Naimy was born into a Greek Orthodox family and completed his elementary education at the Baskinta School. He then studied at the Russian Teachers Institute in Nazareth and the Theological Seminary in Poltava. He moved to the United States in 1911, joining his 2 older brothers in Washington, where they owned a furniture store. He then moved to Seattle to study at the University of Washington, earning degrees in law and liberal arts. After his graduation in 1916 he moved to New York City, and in 1918 he was drafted in the U.S. Army. For members of the Pen League in 1920: Nacy Barida, Khalil Gibran, Abd al-Masih Haddad, and Naimy. After the war, Naimy returned for a time to Washington, where he began his writing career in 1919. He wrote poetry in Russian, Arabic and English. He then moved back to New York, where he joined with Khalil Gibran and 8 other writers to form a movement for the rebirth of Arabic literature, the New York Pen League. Gibran was its president and Naimy its secretary. In 1932, having lived in the States for 21 years, Naimy returned to Lebanon, where he lived for the rest of his life. He died of pneumonia at the age of 98 on February 28, 1988, in Beirut. Mikhail believed that all humans are brothers and sisters in soul, as they come from one source that is God, and to that same source they return. And it is for that reason that he advocated to end all wars, for wars are but acts of ignorance of one's roots, those of godliness and divinity. In fact, he mentioned in his book, Memoirs of a Vagrant Soul the Pitted Face, that he viewed any country's borders or partitions as illusory. What Mikhail truly wished for is the awareness of the human's true nature of oneness and divinity. How important was Lebanon to Mikhail Naimy? Even though he lived abroad for a long period, moving between Palestine, Ukraine, Russia and the US, Mikhail carried Lebanon in his heart. It was the silent magnet that made him ultimately leave everything behind and return to his country. As a matter of fact, Mount Sinai was a huge source of inspiration to him. Its beauty was a major inspiration for all his works, mainly for the Book of Mirdads, a masterpiece that's available in more than 40 languages. In 1953, Albert Rihani founded a private museum in honor of his brother, Ameen Rihani. This museum was renovated in 1986 and now occupies the lower level of the Rihani home in Farah, Lebanon. Among a variety of things found in the museum are his English and Arabic writings. His manuscripts, letters, works of art of his own and those presented to him by artist friends. Busts sculpted of him, personal belongings, newspaper clippings, and personal gifts from world leaders and distinguished friends. Ameen Fairs Rihani, born November 24, 1876, Faith Mount Lebanon, died September 13, 1940, was an Arab-American novelist, poet, essayist, and political figure whose written works examined the differences and intersections between the categories of East and West. Rihani was born in a town northeast of Beirut during the period of Ottoman control. He immigrated with his uncle to New York City in 1888, his father joined them a year later. After a few years in school learning English, he began to work as a clerk and bookkeeper for the family merchant business in Lower Manhattan. He was a voracious reader of Western literature, especially the works of Victor Hugo, Walt Whitman, Henry David Thoreau, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Thomas Carlyle. In 1895, Rihani pursued a career as an actor and traveled for some months with a Shakespearean theater group. Returning to New York with the wish to acquire a proper education, he entered New York Law School in 1897. A lung infection caused him to withdraw from school, and he returned to Lebanon to recuperate. There he studied the Arabic language and classic Arabic poetry, in particular work by the blind poet Al-Ma'ari, whose poems he later translated into English. Back in New York City in 1899, Rihani became active in both the New York avant-garde and the budding Arab-American cultural scene, publishing newspaper articles, original and translated poetry, and essays in both English and Arabic. His own early verse was notable for its experimentation, and he introduced the concept of free verse to Arabic poetry. He became an American citizen in 1901. In 1905 he again returned to Lebanon, this time for a stretch of 5 years, living at his family home in the Lebanese mountains. There he completed, 1910, the Rihani Essays, an Arabic-language essay collection that was well received in the Arab intellectual community, and the Book of Khalid, 1911, an English-language novel, considered to be the first by an Arab. The Book of Khalid concerns the immigration of 2 Lebanese boys to New York City and their subsequent spiritual evolution. It was illustrated by Rihani's friend Khalil Gibran and has been cited as a major influence on Gibran's book The Prophet, 1923. In the decade after Rihani's return to New York in 1911, he became increasingly active in political causes while still producing a steady stream of diverse literary works in both English and Arabic. He spoke and wrote extensively in favor of the liberation of Arab lands from Ottoman control. Rihani in 1916 married Bertha Case, an American artist and member of the Impressionist social circle. In 1922 Rihani initiated a series of documentary travels throughout the Arabian Peninsula, recording his encounters and becoming one of the first individuals to meet and then depict the region's various leaders. In particular, Ibn Saud, the tribal leader who formed the modern state of Saudi Arabia, received Rihani with honors as a major Arab intellectual, and they began a long correspondence and friendship. Rihani wrote further non-fiction books in English as well as a wide array of poems, articles, and essays for both Western and Eastern audiences until his death following a bicycle accident. Throughout his life and work Rihani highlighted what he saw as the essential characteristics of East and West and the possibility of a cultural synthesis. He argued that the benefits of science and political liberalism could be reconciled with traditional religion and virtue, and he advocated political, cultural, and religious reforms as part of the movement for Arab liberation from the Ottoman Sultanate and Western colonialism. All of his work was intensely spiritual, and he was devoted to the prospect of fully melding and unifying all religions.
The Jesuit order started the mission in Bikfaya in 1833, building the monastery over an old Antonine hermitage, and brought an icon of Our Lady painted by Sasso Ferrato the very next year. In this church the Marian confraternities began celebrating the month of Mary in 1838. The church was built in 1856. During the consecration the church was planned to be dedicated to St. John Francis Regis, yet the people began singing a Marian hymn. The superiors read that as a sign and dedicated the church to Our Lady. The miraculous Virgin protected the villagers from the massacres of 1860, and the cholera pandemic in 1867, and she is known for her miraculous interventions. The Congregation of the Blessed Hearts was inaugurated in this church in 1873. And in it the young Saint Rafqa, Boutrasi el Reyes, who was the spiritual daughter of the Jesuit Father Kalam el Jumail, heard the calling of the Madonna telling her, "You will become a nun," which led her to enter the monastic life on the 9th of February 1855. The town of Hemlaya, home of Lebanon's Saint Rafqa, many visitors pass by the home of the saint on the hill where she grew up before entering the monastery.